Welcome to another video from Refresh Cricket, guys. Today we have got a GH Delta in the shop. Never actually come across GH before, but looks like quite a nice bat. It's been obviously used for quite a few runs. So this one's got quite a bit of damage down at the toe. You can just see there. You've got a little damage down there, comes through the toe as well, so that will get cleaned up. And then coming along on the splice of the bat as well, you can see quite a big crack there. So we'll get all this fixed up, refreshed and ready to go. This one's quite an exciting bat for me. This is the first one that was actually used or purchased, sorry, through our online shop. So if you want more details on how to get your bat refreshed, just simply head to www.refreshed-cricket.co.uk. We are 72 hours after all of these clamps went on, and we are just going to take them off now and see how the glue has dried. You can see just down there is where the crack was, and you can see that's all dried up quite nicely and clamped down well. So that's in pretty good nick. All of this dry stuff here, that's not really a crack. If I try and put the knife in, you'll see that doesn't really go in very far, so that will just get the epoxy resin toe guard after a quick sand down, and that will come up fine. Right. Next on to the face cracking. So if you remember on this one, there was quite a lot of delamination, quite a lot of cracking on the face. So having this board on top here, what that does is that allows constant pressure to be applied all over the face of the bat. And you'll see that these ridges in the board actually allow the board to curve around the face of the bat as well. And that's underneath all of that is the parcel tape as well, and that actually is probably the best clamp that we can use at this for stuff like this. So let's have a look how this delamination has dried up. That looks pretty good to me. That's all come out really well. That's stuck down in exactly where it should have been stuck down. We're very happy with that. If you remember in the video, you'll see that I put a load of sawdust and glue down, and what that has done, if you can see in spots like this, that has just filled in the cracks where the wood has actually chipped off, and here as well. So that will form a really nice solid bond now too. So that's looking in great nick too. And then finally, last but not least, onto the handle crack. So if you remember, we had quite a big crack running down the back of the bat on this one. So if I turn the bat over, we'll get a better picture of where we were. So remember, there's a big crack coming down here, and it went up into the splice a little bit as well. So remove all of these clamps. I don't think I've ever used as many clamps on a bat before, but if you've got them, use them. Let's have a look at this now. Again, using the parcel tape as an initial clamp, just to try and get the wood to bind as good as possible, as well as possible, and then using the other clamps just to apply a bit more final pressure in some certain spots. But again, you'll notice I had the two bits here, two bits of the handle like that. What that does is it stops any marks happening on the actual willow, and it also spreads the pressure of the willow across that whole bit. So all of that would have been pushing this part of the bat together, and we have the clamps here as well to push this part together as well to make that seamless. And you can see again that has dried up very well, and there is no way of getting anything through that now. And let's have a look how the handle went as well. This is slightly harder to clamp up, so I've just relied on the tape here. But again, you can see there's no gap there. No gap there at all now, so that's all glued up very nicely. So what I'll do next is I will sand this all down. Give it a sand down with 120 grit. That will get rid of all of the old face, and will get rid of all the glue that's not needed and the residue of the stickers. And then after that, we'll have a look at how it is, and we'll probably end up doing the handle binding as well. So that So here we are after the first initial sand down. You see everything's come up really, really nicely now. So there's no delamination at all. You can see there's some little cracks all around here still. So what I'm going to do now, I'm just going to get some super glue, pop them over the cracks, and then just do a really quick sand just before the glue dries. And what that does is all the sawdust that comes up from the sander just goes in and makes sure that those cracks are filled up again as well nicely, and the super glue actually seeps into the wood and really binds those cracks well. And you'll see there's one here as well that we can pop some super glue in. That one's slightly bigger, but again, that process of super glue and sawdust will work perfectly on that. Just going to do it all over the original cracks as well, just to make sure that they don't open up again. But all this area will be covered by a bat face protection sheet anyway. But just in case, it's always best to go a little bit over with the glue, just to make sure that the bat is good to go again. You can see here that I just let the glue dry a little bit, just for a few seconds, and then away we go and sand. straight over. So if we just do this edge one now, same process. Might just open this crack up just a tiny bit first though, just to get some glue right in there. Might even need a knife, it's so thin. So this isn't one that we could use wood glue on, it's just not a big enough crack. If we were to open it up and put wood glue in, it wouldn't really be necessary. See, pop that in, let that seep in. One of the reasons I won't clamp here, if hopefully you can see this, you can't actually really get the clamp on to close the gap. You see, because of the curvature of the bat, you can't actually get the force to go on like that. So that's again why I'd use this super glue and sawdust technique. So if we just sand over now, you'll notice that the sawdust will fill in and that gap will get glued up very well. So that's all that's needed, and you'll see now that there is no way that gap will open up again. So that is now all sealed very well. So next thing to do on this bat will be to get the resin toe guard put on. So I know quite a few people have spoken to me about the resin toe guard, and again they ask why I've done it. So let me go get the resin. I'll come back and I'll explain why I put a resin toe guard on rather than a traditional one. So the reason I use epoxy resin rather than a traditional toe guard, pretty much every bat that I've ever repaired that has come in with a traditional toe guard, the toe guard's just flapping off and it hasn't actually done anything. All a toe guard really does, those traditional rubber ones, all they really ever do is stop the bottom of the bat getting wet, but they only ever do that when they are on, and half the time they're not even on. So what I found on on one of my old bats, best thing to do is actually pop an epoxy resin toe guard on. Now my dad was a boat builder and used epoxy resin to waterproof all of his glue ups and his joints and everything. So I know that epoxy is hard wearing, it dries rock hard, and I know it's a very good bonding agent, and it is also waterproof. So the reason, what we do here is we just pop this on, and this does everything that I think a toe guard should do. It bonds and binds the bottom of the bat, so the fibres, the bottom of the bat, especially important in a bat like this where you can see that it's got quite dry down at the toe, and all of these fibres here will now form a rock solid bond again because of the epoxy resin. It will also help with this crack along here that we repaired. It will help bond that as well. We know that it's waterproof, we know that it dries hard, so it's not going to fall off the bat, and we know that water's not going to creep up into the bottom of the bat as well from playing in a wet April weekend like we're about to start. So beauty of this stuff is you can also see if any cracks do appear. I don't think I have seen a bat that has got an epoxy toe guard that has cracked down at the bottom, but that might just be that I haven't seen one yet. But so far the evidence is that these epoxy toe guards are just so much better than the rubber ones. So that's why I will always put these on. So that needs to dry now for about 5 minutes. I can't do any more sanding or anything like that, just because I don't want to get sawdust onto the epoxy whilst it's drying. So what I'll do is I will now come around and we can look at rebinding. So the binding is actually a really important part of the bat handle. What it does, see if I can see any examples of it up here. I can't really, we're not quite high enough up on the bat. But what the binding actually does is it keeps the handle together. This is wrapped around incredibly tightly, and it helps keep the bat handle together. The bat handle goes through a huge amount of shock every time you hit the ball, and it is designed to absorb a lot of that shock. So if you can imagine, there'll be a lot of movement, a lot of vibrations in that handle. So the binding really just helps it absorb that and helps it all stick together. The problem is we get quite a lot is that the binding starts coming loose. What people do is they just let it go loose and they wrap it round and pop their handle back over it and forget about it. Actually, what that does is that causes this part of the handle to become just a little bit weaker. If you can imagine, this part of the handle actually needs as much strength as possible. So what I will always do is I will always look to rebind the bat. It's important to try and use the original binding as well, so that there's continuity in the pressure that is exerted in the binding that is on the grip of the bat. So just whack some normal household PVA over the part that will be glued up. That's all that is used, just normal PVA. Make a nice big mess, because PVA does dry see-through, and then just with lots of strength and pressure, pulling it really tight every time and getting it as close to the previous layer of binding, if you like, as possible. We will just wrap the bats around. It can be quite a bit of a tedious process, so what I'll do is I'll fast forward this so you don't have to watch. Okay, so now time to do one of the last bits of sanding. So we go from 180 up to a 240 grit now. So that just helps get the last few little burrs off before giving it a good quick polish. What this also does is this will get rid of the overlapping here of the toe guard as well. See now that that's all come up nicely, so the toe guard is all in the correct place now. We'll just knock those little bits off. So now it's just the final sand down and polish, so we'll go on a much higher grit and just do a very light sanding. So again, the idea here is not to take any wood off, it's just to make the bat really nice and smooth, just like it was just out of the factory. Before doing the 800 grit, it's important just to brush down the bat, just to make sure that there's no sawdust or dust of any kind on it, just to make sure that it doesn't get stuck in the sandpaper and cause a less than perfect finish. So now that's all smooth over. Turn the sander right down. And that's it. So next is onto the stickers and the tape. So before we do that, we'll give it one more wipe down, just to make sure that there's no dust going to get in the way of the stickers and the back face and stuff going on. So first to go on is the back face. Measure it out roughly, and I always like to cut it just over to make sure that the So the best way I've found to put edge tape on, or the bat face on, sorry, get yourself started up at the toe, get yourself somewhere in the middle and just apply a little bit of light pressure on there just to stick it down. Then unroll everything and see where you end up. You see that I'm way over this way, so I just need to correct that. But that will mean correcting down here as well. So if we look now, we're in pretty good shape all over. So I can peel the rest of this back, just removing any air bubbles that there are maybe, and give it a good rub to make sure it sticks. To the bat. Now, next we cut in at a 45-degree angle just to help make sure that the bottom of the bat doesn't interfere with the face tape sticking down. And we can gently roll the edge tape over, applying lots of force when you do this to try and make sure that the edge of the bat face rolls over properly and doesn't form a little bubble. So just do it bit by bit and go nice and slowly. And there we go. Nice advantage also of using these epoxy resin toe guards is they actually come out a little bit over the edge of the bat. And what you can do with the bat face is you can actually score all the way along the epoxy resin, so you're not actually scoring on the wood, you're not actually damaging the wood. And edge tape is very simple. Up to the top of the bat face, about half and half. Squeeze it down on the face. Cut off in a straight line. You want this just above the toe of the bat. Cut off in a straight line, and then again 45 degrees to make sure that that stays out of the way of the toe. And all you're doing there, the reason for that again is just to make sure that no dust, you're trying to avoid as much dust as possible getting underneath this tape. Otherwise what will happen is that tape will just lose grip and come up flying around all over the place, and you often see that on bats that haven't had tape applied properly to them. And then finally, there is no rhyme or reason to do this, but it's a little bit of a signature that I do. I've always done it. Just pop a horizontal band over the top of the bat face as well. Perfect, so that's all the protective taping. Make sure they're in the middle of the bat and they're aligned properly. Make a rub, activate the adhesive. Now the eagle-eyed of you will notice that in the intro I mentioned going to www.refreshed-cricket.co.uk, and this sticker says refreshed-cricket.com. They both work. I'd love to say I'm an international brand, but I have both web links, so they both work. So a nice lot of getting some heat through here. It's a bit cold out here today, so Might take a little bit longer to get the heat going through. Good news is that my workshop is being built as we speak. So in a month or so I will have a purpose-built workshop to work in rather than the outside. Touch of oil, just standard linseed oil on the hands. Much prefer doing it by hand. I'll just give it a good rub in. You don't need much oil, just give it a nice even coating all the way throughout. It's almost like I'm giving the bat a massage. Maybe I should go into a bat massaging business. Make sure you get it up on the when you oil, make sure you oil up on the end of the grain. The end of the grain is the shoulder of the bat. Make sure they are nicely coated, because that is where the end of the grain is exposed. That is where the most moisture will potentially eke out. Obviously down here with the toe we have a toe guard on, so there's no moisture able to leak out there. And finally just up on the top as well. So there is the bat. You can see all of the cracks. So that was the big, that one here was the big crack in the back. So that's all glued up perfectly. We've got the all of the cracking and delamination on the front. You can't even really notice that anymore. And then you've got the big crack along the toe here, which is all fixed. So this bat has come up really well, really nicely, really pleased with it. So we'll put a grip on. I'll do that off camera because it's getting a bit dark now, so we'll put a grip on and then get that back out to the customer.